Hey, welcome everybody. This is the ComicBase Livestream. I'm your host, Pete Bickford, and this is the episode. It's our almost 200th episode, but episode 199. We're calling it the Rise of the Machines. Honestly, it has a lot to do with a fairly uncanny encounter I had this week with the new AI-based development tools that we are using with ComicBase and pretty much all other utilities and mobile apps and things like that. The I have thoughts. We'll leave it at that one. But anyway, a couple of brief announcements before we get into things. First of all, I want to say hi to the folks who are here. Auro Viejo's first in the door here from cold Minneapolis. Yes, halfway to the North Pole. It feels like it. Absolutely. Xanadu Comics saying hi from Seattle. Mike Beam here from Vancouver, Washington. I think the basic news for everybody is it cold. I was out here in Tennessee, and we just had it's supposed to be this winter storm again, which in the south is a very, very low bar. Honestly, if like 3 snowflakes fall on the road, it shuts down everything, and this was no exception. We got about 2 inches of snow where I'm at, but everything is closed. Grocery stores had runs on all the regular stuff. There's no milk or eggs or anything in this, to be had. Everyone's canceling appointments. Doctor's office is closed. You name it. But it's the usual, snow in the south. Steve, let's see. Some questions about where we live here. Tim Kelbreth joining us from Winnebago, Illinois. Welcome. Steve Dadger's in the house and everything. And the question that someone had was, what does it look like here as far as did we get clobbered with snow? Let me throw up a quick image of it up here. This is my dog out on the back porch here. I sent this one to my brush-loving friends and referred to him as Bytor and the Snow Dog. But that's just Dodger there. But yeah, we got a little bit of snow. It was a good time. But anyway, nothing much. I'm fine. I grew up in Minneapolis, outside Minneapolis, and honestly, this 2 inches of snow thing holds no terrors for me. So anyway, but that said, so another quick announcement. We had a demo request come through for how to do a checklist of items for a given artist to see what you've got. The quick answer on this one, and I'm not going to have time to do the actual demo on it, but if you do a find for the artist, and if you just say list only items in stock, it'll give you the ones that are only in stock. If you want to do if you don't check that box, then you'll get a list of all the works by that artist. And of course, you can use Quick Report, and I'd be happy to show it, but I don't think we're going to have time today. Because I really do kind of want to get right into it, because like I say, I've had thoughts. Anyway, so I'll start the story as best as I can with this. Most of my day is spent, when I'm not doing businessy type things and managing employees and filing comics and doing all the other silly things and everything. When I'm being productive, most of my day is spent programming in, a variety of things, everything from SQL Server code on the back end to manage our database stuff to a development environment called Maui. It's a platform or whatever you want to call it, for doing mobile work, to C#, working on things like billing issues. But anyway, a lot of different things like there. But the common thing that a lot of them have in place is a thing called Visual Studio. This is what's called the Integrated Development Environment, the IDE, if you're a programmer, which most of these things are running in at any given moment. And what an IDE does for programmers is it gives you ways of managing your projects. It lets you, basically bring resources into your working environment, handle your compiles and your builds, do your test cases and all the things like that. Think of it as like Microsoft, if you were a writer, it'd be your Microsoft Word. But this is the development environment. Obviously they're insanely complicated and such like that for programmers, but it's where we live, home base, everything. Now, Visual Studio, we're using version 2022. Unlike ComicBase, they don't try to get a year ahead of things. They are happy to lag several years behind. But their version 2022, version 17.13. Before that, I believe it was like 17.12.4 or something like that. It was some ridiculous number like that. But I'm used to the idea that they come up with a new version every week or two. And honestly, I have enough problems with my own bugs and my own problems in life that when you're developing development system has a new update to download, you don't think too much about it. You just get right down to it, and you download the thing because it presumably makes something about your life better. And if that's true, then you want to get right on it and download the new thing. So it's basically, I think Thursday night, get ready to knock off and update on close, and we're downloading the new 17.13. And I'm looking over the release notes. This is something like, it includes the new Copilot AI features. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever, Microsoft Copilot, blah blah blah. It's not something I use on my desktop. It's not something I was particularly interested in having in my development environment. Like, dude, I'm a freaking programmer. Leave me alone. As long as I can turn the damn thing off, I do not care. But in the meantime, I'm of course going to download the latest version of the IDE. So download it, didn't think about it, sat down, and it's Friday. And as it turned out, that particular Friday, my day was kind of open. I didn't have a lot of super pressing things to be done. I had a few comic books that needed filing that had been sent to us from editorial. They need to be entered in the collection and stuff like that. And I looked at it and I thought, well, I don't know, man. I don't really want to do that right now because it seems like work. And so let me get on with something that I'm interested in doing. And I'm going to take that back. It was Friday night when I left off. This is Saturday morning now. I mean, it's probably important to the rhythm of the day. So this is Saturday. And so I think, okay, so let's go ahead. We'll download the latest update, which is just pushed. And like for many of you people, when you download an update, you get that little report at the end, which says, hey, there might have been a little blue line that appears, says there are X number of unrecognized items that came out. And in my case, because I try to keep on top of these things, it turned out that there was a comic book called Rogue State number 3, which someone had pointed out belatedly, there never really was a number 3. It was really number 3A because there was never a regular 3. There was just 3A, 3B, blah, blah, blah. One of those types of things. Now, we try not to change the designations of issues and stuff like that, but if we do it, we want to take the hit as quickly as possible, get onto the right side of things and move on, because it doesn't make any sense if there's a 3B, but there was never a 3A and so forth. So clearly editorial had thought about that. I wasn't in on the decision. They just did their job. Now, when that stuff happens to you, I don't know what you guys all do. I know what I do when it happens to me, which is I will go to the orphaned issue, the one that they say is no longer a recognized issue, and in this case be Rogue State number 3, and I'll go grab its barcode, and then I'll go and put the type, I'll just copy that barcode and I'll paste it into ComicBase, and I'll let it find all the barcode matches for that, and it'll tell me where that thing got moved over to, because there'll be something which isn't Rogue State number 3, and that's the new designation, whatever that is. So I was thinking about this, and remember, I didn't really want to do my work that day. It was a Saturday, it was nice out, and so forth, but not nice enough to go do something out in the real world. But I certainly didn't want to file comic books all day. I was just kind of going through the motions at that point. And so it occurs to me, it's like, well, an excellent way for me to dodge my work today is I just more or less told you the algorithm I would use to how to resolve missing issues if I could find one by barcode. Well, screw it. Why don't I actually put that into the program? Because then if I made it so that anytime there was a missing issue, we just found its right name by its barcode, well, that might not just help me, it would take me all of like 30 seconds to resolve Rogue State number 3. But if I did the work to fix it, for every time it happened, then it not only helps future me, but it helps all of y'all, right? I mean, so it could maybe take this problem out of contention for everyone, and that would be a cool thing. And like I say, plus it has the advantage of not having me do my work today. So I thought, okay, so all right, new plan for the day. Instead of filing comic books, I'm now going to write a routine which resolves unknown comic books, items on the unknown report, by looking for their barcodes. All right, great. And so you get out, you boot up Visual Studio, which you just installed the night before, and you start typing. And this is where my day took a horrible, weird, bizarre turn. And it went something like this. By the way, first I want to say I had a Tyler T, and oh yes, and Gregory Hicks said, yes, hits for the broadcast just doubled now that Dodger appeared. Anyway, and hi to Tim Kilbreth from Winnipeg. Oh, we already said that. Okay, got it. So let me show you a picture of what happened when I typed. And literally, I'm just typing here the name of the routine that I intend to write. And I'm just thinking, okay, in my head, I would like to write something which resolves unknown titles. And I got something on screen that looked like this. All right. So now I'm going to do something which is a little bit weird here, but please bear with me because it's a little important. And this is where I will lose all of my audience, but it's worth going through anyways because it's pretty damn cool. I'm going to read code to you guys, or at least describe what the heck you're looking at here. All right. So if you guys can zoom in on this whole thing, and I'm going to do my best to zoom on. Let's see if I can get the. How do I get the program view to go full screen for me? There we go. Okay. So what this is I had literally started typing the words private sub. Private means it's just a little old routine and won't be called by other places. Sub means it's a subroutine, and I called it attempt to resolve unknown update items, which is okay, it's lengthy. If you're a coder yourself, you can sit there and say, hey, Bickford, that's some lengthy ass typing you just did there, but yeah, let's just roll with it. And I figured this is a routine. It's going to be a magic routine. Not sure how it goes yet because I'm sort of thinking it through as I'm typing. But I know I'm going to give it the update results, which is a bunch of data that we gather up during the course of an update, and by looking at the update results, it will then do its work. All right, so then I type, and this the next line is, and everything in red is stuff I had typed, and everything in gray is stuff I didn't type. So I've named the routine. It's a magic up routine. It's going to take all the update results I've gathered, and I say if has and I didn't even get to finish the word unknown, because at that point the new Visual Studio environment just auto-completed for me. And what it did left my jaw on the damn ground. What it did, let's see if I can put myself on the screen here without ruining. Oh, okay, there we go. I fit nicely on the code sample here. What it did is, if it had autocompleted if has unknown titles, right? So if there were unknown titles, in parenthesis the update results I got, or has unknown items, so it already had guessed that there's a difference between unknown items and unknown titles. Okay, freaky, which true, but freaky. Then what it's doing with the next several lines is it's putting up a dialogue. It says, okay, set up a dialogue and show it a title, a prompt that says some titles were not updated, and there'll be a caption for that thing, and it'll take that dialogue will have a yes, it'll be a yes/no question. It'll take it'll be a question, and it'll have the buttons yes and no, and then I'm going to look at what the user typed in. So I'm going to prompt them to say, well, there was something about there were titles that were not updated because reasons, and I guess I'm going to type in what those reasons were. That's an exercise to the coder later on, but they put it nicely in the program resources where I can localize it for different languages and such. And I'm going to ask them a question that says, do you want to update them? Do you want to cope with this? And if they say yes, then it did something super, super, super freaky. It says, all right, well then I'm going to go launch a web page. Process.start means kick off basically whatever usually handles this, and go to a web page called comicbase.com/support/knowledgebase/article/index/5030001/what do I do if some of my titles are missing or incorrect? In other words, it's going to launch a help article, which I couldn't remember writing, but I figure it's been indexing my site this whole time, so maybe it knows something I haven't. I've been doing this for 32 years, so I forget a lot of stuff, and things have changed names a lot of times over the course of those 32 years. So I thought, well, maybe we did write that, because it seems like the sort of thing we'd have written at some point. But basically, I got as far as saying, if you have unknown titles, and then it said, oh, well, clearly what you want is you want to take the user to a dialogue where it says, you want to go see some information on this? And then it's going to show them the help article that we have already written clearly, which takes them there. So freaky. This was the autocomplete. So this happened literally, I'm in the middle of typing a word. I didn't go to ChatGPT. I didn't go someplace else and ask for help on my problem. It was watching as I'm thinking out loud, and I'd only gotten thinking out loud as of, I would like to solve the problem of missing titles. and I said, if they have missing, and then it figured titles or issues, put up the dialogue, to the heart, to the point, and so forth. And it had written correct code for doing this that was actually even set up nicely for localization and stuff like that. Now, to be fair, it wasn't what I wanted to do. I didn't want to give the user a thing that says, well, you got some title names wrong, so here's some ways that you can do better. Now I want to freaking fix the problem for them. So I had grander ambitions than it had intuited, but it had taken a perfectly legitimate guess on how I might want to approach the problem, and had taken that guess based on the name of the routine, resolve unknown titles. And it had broken down several subtleties of what would be necessary to fix that routine in the time it took me to type, which is not very long. So, because I'm a pretty reasonably fast typist. So this is the part where I go and I go, and I, of course, I would love to have copied and pasted the whole thing, but I realized as soon as I move the cursor, the autocomplete goes away. So I wound up screenshotting it, and I thought I have to screenshot this mofo because this is so far beyond what autocomplete is. It's life changing. And that was the start of my day. Right after that, this thing over here happened. Let me go to the next graphic. I had said, okay, all right. So here's my plan. I'm going to go through all the issues. All the issues that were listed as not matched in your list, and I'm going to say, well, can I find an alternate item for it by its barcode? Right. The idea. You write these things. They're called algorithms. Basically, the algorithm is just a plan for dealing with a problem, right? And the algorithm goes like this. You've got a list of things that didn't match. Now, if you can look these ones up and find a single match, and I mean exactly one match, which is someplace else, it's not the one, it's not where you found it, where it said, look, I've never heard of this item. But if you find exactly one match that is someplace else that was in the found set, well, then the thing changed its name or its item number, and so you can safely move it with great confidence over to that other place. And if you can't, if you find zero matches, well, that means that the users threw some item in that you'd never heard of before, and you can't be helped because we've never heard of it. Best thing you can do there is say, well, hey, we still don't know what that is, so maybe check it over and make sure it's not mislisted on your own. But if it isn't, then send it to us as a new data submission. That's if you don't find it at all. But if you find two matches, let's say you find that there are 3 or 4 things with the same barcode in the database, well, then you've got no confidence at all as to which one of them is the right one. But if you look for it by its title and issue and you find exactly one match, then you've got a very, very tight way of saying, well, no, clearly this thing was listed officially as something different, and provided they've given you permission to change their thing to move it to the official thing, well, they're in good shape. All right. Here again, look at what I've typed and look at what it suggested. I had literally typed function find alternate, and I hadn't even written. I'm sorry. Everything in red I have actually written. I had actually written function find alternate items by barcode. Item by barcode, which is to say find the other one. When in this case it was rogue state number 3. Well, so find anything else which is the same barcode as rogue state number 3, which isn't number 3. And then I got as far as typing the word barcode at the top there, and it had filled in, oh, well, if I were going to find something else by its barcode, I would need to know the barcode, which would be a string. I would need to know its media type, which is of type media types, just like a book or a comic book or a newspaper or a magazine. Okay, I'd need to know that. And then I would need to start writing an SQL query. And that thing would, and it got this wrong, but it got it really close. It was okay, find me all titles where and it even knew to go and look for, because it's going to search a different table based on the type of media. So if I'm looking for a book, I'm looking in the books table. If I'm looking for a comic book, I'm looking in the comic issues table. If I'm looking for a newspaper, etc. Right? And look for it where the UPC is the UPC I'm about to give you. That's the barcode I'm handing in. And you're going to tell me, what the name of that title is. Now, this, if we're looking very closely at this thing, you could analyze it and see that it's not quite right. It's because knowing the title it's under, like if I did that for Rogue State number 3, I would get back a match that said, well, it's Rogue State. And I'd be like, yeah, thanks, Sherlock. That was not particularly helpful. What I needed to know is need to know that its new official name was Rogue State number 3A, not Rogue State number 3. But it was damned close. And that's a hell of a lot of code with, again, a hell of a lot of understanding of not just the pattern, but the semantics of, I mean, like what it meant to do what I was looking for. It knew just by my literally saying find an alternate name by its barcode. I mean, I didn't do any pre-planning work. There was no sketching. There was no process by which I was telling the computer what it was that I was doing there. I was literally just getting started fleshing out the idea I had in my head for how I would go about doing this thing. But because I'd said find alternate, and I probably just because I said alternate, not alternates, it was looking for exactly one match. That's what execute scalar means, is bring back one match. Don't bring back a whole list of matches. And it had written, completely syntactically correct code to get you there. So anyway, so again, it took a little futzing with it to get the thing to be the right code. And then this is the last time I'll show you code, but I do got to show you this one because it got very, very strange. So let's say I had gone and I'd found that last bit there. Then it brought back, again, it's just auto-completing here. It brought back this, and let me go ahead and make this large so I can see it. Everything you're seeing on screen here, virtually everything on the screen, it brought back as an autocomplete, including the stuff that's not gray at the moment because it did in 2 bits. So it said, okay, clearly what you want to do is you want to go and bring me back the title and the item number. So it's bringing back what's now called a reader, not a scalar of those things. So it says basically, yeah, when you find the alternate one, if I was looking at a book, bring me back a new book who is defined as a book with that given title and item number. If it was a comic book, bring me a comic issue, which is that. If it was a magazine, give me a magazine issue, which is based on the title and issue and so forth, and so forth. And everything you're seeing on screen here basically was auto corrected in. When it did that whole block up above there, it got exactly one thing wrong. Is for reasons I will never get. It had reversed the name of the 2 parameters, where it says bring back a new book, which is the title and the item number. The way that parameter works is it actually works by. It had put them in item number title order. That's why it doesn't show as an autocomplete here, because I had to fix it. It had reversed the order of the 2 parameters, which is actually the strangest error I can think of for it to make, because clearly it had to have been looking at the names of parameters, and you'd think it would have gotten that match. That should have been the easiest thing it did out of this entire process. But then the thing where you could feel the icy feeling of doom crawling, it really is the sense of the uncanny. You could feel that just crawling down the back of your neck, is the part it did at the end here. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize for this, guys. The camera is on the wrong place, and I do this a lot. So here's the code it brought back. So it basically, based on the title issue it found, it creates a new book, comic issue, magazine, or newspaper based on those things. But then look at the part it did down at the bottom in the gray. Now, when programmers write programs, it's common a practice to write anything that could go wrong, or at least that could go wrong. It's common practice to trap it in a thing called a try catch block, which is to say try doing a certain thing, and if a problem happens, catch the problem, they call it the exception, and then do something with the error. Now, if you don't do that, and you guys probably at some point in life have encountered something like this in ComicBase, I will confess, because ComicBase has about 300,000 lines of code in it, and not all of them are perfect because I'm mortal. But anyway, but if there's ever an error that happens that I didn't think could ever have happened there, you might have just seen a thing that says like a .NET error, and it gives you a whole bunch of gobbledygook, which is very intimidating. And somewhere in that gobbledygook is the error message, which I could probably decipher to tell you what went wrong. But it's certainly not the most user-friendly way to deal with any of this stuff. Now, let's say you're an AI and you've based your entire practice of how you work on reading the world's code samples. And let's say you figured out certain patterns, like, well, if I'm about to do a thing that, I've been talking to users all along and other things, maybe I'm going to prompt the user for permission to do the thing first. So maybe that's where it got the whole trick about, putting up the dialogue and looking for them to click the yes button. Maybe that's where that came from. And it figured out because of the names of parameters and things like that. Maybe it figured out because I said I'm looking for a single match, or I'm looking for, find an alternate item. Maybe it figured out that I'm looking for, the number of things it's looking for has to be equal exactly to 1, otherwise don't do it, and so forth. Yeah, let's say it's smart enough this way. This is the part where it gets really strange, is that up until this point, there's a bunch of things that happen I didn't show you here because I don't want the story to go on forever, believe it or not. But when you look at code samples on the net, when you're writing code for other people to view, you tend to do things that there's kind of like an official style, for doing these things, which isn't necessarily what you would do for your own users, but it looks good for a code sample. Where if there's a try catch block, typically what you'll do is you'll say, well, try to do this thing that I'm going to gloriously explain to you how to do, and just to prove that I'm a good complete coder, I'm going to catch any exceptions, but I'm not actually going to process them or do anything elaborate with them because that'd be writing interface. You don't write interface for code samples. And so what you typically do is called throwing the exception. You basically say, take the bad thing that happened and throw it up the hill. It's kind of like, it's like your boss told you to do something. There was a problem doing it. It's like report back to the boss. Well, boss, there was a problem, and to give him the thing and let the boss handle it. So you throw the exception back up the hill and let the boss worry about it, which is to say, let something other than your freaking code sample worry about how the heck those things work. And that's absolutely up until this point when it wrote any kind of try catch logic around things it was suggesting. It would always say things like write yikes, and then throw the exception up the hill. Except this time it went, after it got done reversing my parameters but suggesting about 15 lines of correct code, it said, okay, if there's in case there's a problem with any of this, report error to user, which is a function I wrote in my code for doing the generic error reporting on routines, honestly, that I don't care that much about. And it did it in the style, it's very idiosyncratic, the way I will write errors that I don't think you're ever going to hit. So, I mean, again, there are 300,000 lines in ComicBase. Virtually everything, unless it's something like, add the numbers, 2 plus 3 and give you a variable called 5. Very, very simple things, or at least it is possible for them to throw an error. Matter of fact, if I give you two variables, A plus B, and I say, give me back an integer containing the result of those two, even that could have an error. Because what if A is a very, very, very large number, and B is another very, very large number. And when you add them together, it comes up with a number that's bigger than you can represent given an integer. I mean, so even the simplest things in programming can go wrong. And so I have adopted a way, because again, you don't want the program to blow up on people, but in routines I'm writing where I'm trying to be nice, but I don't really expect you to hit the error, so I don't need to make the interface very nice. I'll just have a thing where I'll say, okay, report the error to the user, which means, okay, throw up a dialogue with the big stop on it and a message that says, yeah, there's a problem that happened. I'm going to tell you what the exact error message was, and I'm going to tell you where it happened. And I'm going to say like, oh yeah, there was a problem looking up this comic type when I was downloading the update or whatever the thing was. At which point, and again, this is assuming that I don't think this is ever likely to happen to you, but I guess it could. I expect someone to call tech support and say, hey man, I was updating my thing and this thing happened. So you've got at least enough information to pass back to us so that we can figure out what the hell's going on with this guy's database. And then we do what we can to make sure that never happens to anyone again, right? Because you try to get to the underlying thing. But in the meantime, I got to give you something other than that generic error code. But the way I do it is very idiosyncratic to me. This is not the way you do it in sample code on the net. It's not the way other programmers would do it. It's the way I do it. And matter of fact, I'd written this whole function, report error to user, which gives me a simple place where I can trap through. And if I'm looking for any kinds of errors, I can do logging and I can set breakpoints and things like that. So that I've got one place I can get through. I wrote that whole function just to report errors. And my style that I typically do is give the error message and then put the thing about what I was trying to do when I got the message. And that's what it suggested when I was doing the thing. Matter of fact, I hadn't told it what I was doing. I just given it the name of the routine. I hadn't written any of the comments yet, but it knew what my intention was in doing the whole thing. And so it said, okay, yeah, call Pete's report error to user thing, give the message, and then say, when looking for alternate item by barcode, which is exactly what I meant to be doing, but it's not anything that the actual code up to that point where I told it I was doing. So Yeah, like I say, we use the word uncanny a lot in our field. Typically, we use it right before the word X-Men, which I've never understood because the X-Men, at least in my mind, are not particularly uncanny. There's nothing about them that gave me the creeping finger of dread, crawling up my spine. But I gotta say, this was definitely an uncanny feeling. Is the idea that it was intuiting not a pattern. Usually when the computer suggests something, you kind of get where it's where it got the idea to do that. If your phone rings while you're driving down the highway, you don't really get freaked out that it pops up a list of 4 or 5 text messages you could just tap on to say, yeah, I can't talk right now, I'm driving, I'll call you back later, or please leave a message, or whatever else. I mean, just say, look, when you're not taking a call, what are the 5 most common things for you that anyone says, and you can put that sort of list together. That's not a really hard thing. This is so far beyond that. I can't even start to tell you. And literally all day long, I'm working through the weekend, working on this problem. And yeah, example after example would pop up of things where like it was getting the intention of where I was going and refining its attack as I went. And it was really nuts. Now, the new Copilot features in Visual Studio also have something that's a little bit more like what people think of with ChatGPT. We say things like when we were first doing AI and we were talking about use ChatGPT and isn't this new thing freaky? I'd be like, say, yeah, write me a 800-word script for a new episode of Seinfeld, and it just in 20 seconds came up with a perfectly plausible, lackluster kind of season 5 version of a script, for Seinfeld. All the characters were kind of acting the way that you're used to the characters acting. The kind of plot was wacky in the way the Seinfeld episodes were and so forth. I mean, it clearly knew the patterns. In which case you say, okay, I get that you get the patterns. This is pretty cool. But this was going beyond that. Now, but when I go to ChatGPT and I say, look, please make this better, or write me the script, I'm going out of my way. I'm going to a special tool. I'm expecting to spend some time refining. Everything you saw up till now was just autocomplete. I hadn't gone anywhere. But anyway, Copilot does offer some tools in the new version to say, okay, well, take a look at this routine now that I think I've got this routine worked out, and then this, for you guys who don't code, the actual problem is expressed through many of these type of routines strung together with different conditionals and things like that. So any little block of code you're seeing, that's not the whole problem. That's one aspect of the problem that we're handling. But you'd look at one of these blocks of code that you had written and you say, well, is there anything I could do to make this better? And then it sits there and it says, okay, well, yeah, okay. And it found, in some cases, found like some mechanical checks, like, oh, well, you didn't validate that the parameters were not going to be null when you passed them in, because I knew when I passed them in, I was creating them right beforehand, and I hadn't passed them null, so it was never going to happen. So I thought, all right, technically, yeah, if I were writing this as a class assignment to turn in for like a coding school, you would sit there and say, well, that's not perfectly good library code, because what if the next person writes, uses this routine and they don't know to create their parameters ahead of time and null check them? Well, then, Mr. Bickford, I'm going to wag my finger at you. You did. It's a perfectly good kind of coding school kind of thing to suggest. And there were some nice formatting tricks. I actually learned a new formatting trick in this thing that I had not known existed, just as syntactical, they call it syntactical sugar, of a nicer way to express SQL statements in line. It's like, oh, that's a good trick. I'm going to steal that one. But then the other one it did that really freaked me out is it said, well, yeah, another thing you did here is because remember, the whole trick with this thing is we need to count. We're going to need in order to find where this issue goes, we're going to need to know its title and the item number for where the new thing is. But we need to make sure, first of all, that there's exactly one match, right? And for all my SQL using life, I've only ever known how to do, if I need to return 2 things, like, the only way I've ever known how to do that is you count the number of things first. You do what's called a count query. And if the count comes back as 1, then you go and you say, oh, now give me the items I will want, because I need more than one item. I can't just ask for one item. I need the title and the item number. And so I can't do it in one. So I got to do 2 queries. So I do the count query, and that takes a, 18th of a second. And then I do the real query if it came back that there's exactly one other match. And I said, oh, well, actually, there's another way to do this one using what's called a window function. And I'm like, what the heck is a window function? And this is something where, again, I work in this thing every day of my damn life. Now, I don't necessarily work in this part of the field every day of my life, the SQL query refinement part. So I had never heard of a window function because apparently it's a new feature that had been developed not that many years ago. Certainly wasn't something that existed commonly in SQL when I was at school. But it turns out it's a new thing. If you guys care about such things, that it takes these aggregate functions like counts and averages and things like that, and instead of giving you one answer for the whole thing, it returns the answer in line with the rest of your other results. And so you can kind of do it if it's not, in certain circumstances, you could return it inline in a set of other things without doing what's called subqueries and other things like that. And it's pretty freaking nifty for this exact case that I was doing. As a matter of fact, now I thought, you kind of learn the trick. You think, well, this could actually be used in a couple other cases. And if it turns out it's generally applicable, and I'll have to check speed on it, it might actually be something that makes going to every title in ComicBase maybe a noticeable amount faster even. So that's pretty cool. And honestly, it's a syntactical, it's a language feature of SQL that hadn't even been invented a decade ago, had not been part of SQLite, which is the particular database we're using. I looked for what these window functions are, and I found about half a page of documentation that the guys who wrote the language had bothered to put in there. So this is not a well-known thing. You don't stumble across these ones. But the SQL assistant, the Copilot assistant, had quite rightly suggested it as an improvement in the coding. And it's also one of those things where, like, yeah, if I don't pick up on this one and start incorporating this in the way I think about my coding, then I'm falling behind. And that's where this whole thing just gets really effing crazy. 300 Baud puts in, yeah, the really interesting stuff is when you go to add a documentation comment and it auto-populates. Yeah, that's another thing it did all the time. One thing we do in code, ideally, is code is a lot of, writing for the next person who's going to, what you're writing at the moment you're writing it, but generally you're working these very twisty, passive logic in your own head at the time. But one way you do a nice kindness for the next person who has to read your code, a day, a year, a month, a decade from now, is you write what's called comments. And you do it in this formalized style, especially at the top, where you sit there and say, okay, this 50 lines of code I just wrote here, it does what it's really meant to do is the following things, and so you sort of describe in words what it's going to be doing in logic in the 50 words below, and you try to point out any traps that future you might settle on and so forth. This is, of course, is also the most ignored portion of coding because you don't get any points for it unless you're in an environment where someone's checking your code and making sure you check in and do all the right things. But it is a pain in the ass for the next guy who has to read your code. So it's like a kindness for future you, if you're that person, or it's a pain in your ass and screw the next guy if the next guy is going to read your code is some other guy on the on a different team that you don't care about. And so as a result, just of the incentives that are at play, comments tend to be one of those things if you work in a bigger shop that just absolutely gets left behind. Well, one of the things that this new AI does is when you go to start, because I'm trying to be nice to future me, is I get done writing this routine and you sit there and say, okay, great. So find alternate thing by barcode, say, and you type quote to initiate the process. I will now start documenting this thing. And then it just auto-completed and suggested, oh, well, it looks like this was a routine that automatically looks for the thing based on these two factors. And if it worked out properly, it returns this thing, that thing, and the other thing, and et cetera. And more often than not, as I was working this week on this thing, I would look at that and just kind of say, yeah, that's pretty much it. And just hit tab and accept it. So, yeah, absolutely freaky stuff. But yeah, good stuff. But yeah, so in summary, what this thing was doing is, and I've taken too long to describe it, but again, I hope you understand how just creeped out I was by this thing happening. Is it was at minimum, suggesting faster ways of typing when I was already going to be typing. I'm kind of used to that. We have autocomplete in our development environments. We're used to it all the time. It fills in the names of variables that we use. If we type the first several letters of it, it automatically capitalizes things. I mean, you wouldn't be able to be a C programmer these days if it wasn't always fixing your capitalization for you and so forth, because the geniuses who came up with C, Kernighan and Ritchie, decided, oh yeah, in the language C, let's make it so if we have a variable, let's call it something like my comic. If I spell it MYCOMIC, all lowercase, it counts as a completely separate variable than if I call it capital MYCOMIC, or for that matter, capital MY, capital COMIC. These are all three different variables. To humans, they look like a guy who's just being sloppy with punctuation, if you even notice it. But to the computer and the people who program C, no, these are completely different variables, because clearly I want to make it so that lowercase I is a different, iterator than capital I, and people who do C all day are used to this sort of thing. But the only way we stay sane and don't spend our entirety of our life chasing down typos is we're used to our IDE basically just auto-completing our variable names for us and our procedure names. Otherwise, no one would ever get anything done. So we're used to the idea of it auto-completing stuff. We're used to it, offering to fill in our parameter lists for it. We're used to it doing things like this. The idea of it filling in your whole chain of logic that you were about to do, which you hadn't even expressed yet, yeah, that's something new. So I'm going through the weekend, and I'm largely done with the whole thing. Now, I haven't done what's called the unit testing on, so I'm not releasing it to the public yet. But by the way, it's also happy to write the unit tests for you. So if you're in the software testing portion of the program, yeah, take that one in mind. But anyway, so I'm going through this whole thing, and honestly, it's taking me longer than ever because I'm treating this thing not like an intelligent typist for me anymore, or a secretary. It's now acting like a colleague. It's sort of like I'm going with one approach, and every time it suggests something, I have to look at what it's suggesting and consider it like I would a colleague's input and say, well, is that better or worse than what I was about to do? And, hey, 3/4 of the time, no, my thing was what I meant to do, and damn it, I'm doing it my way. About 1/4 of the time, I'd be like, I didn't know you could do it that way, or, oh, that's an interesting way of doing it. That might work too. And you have to treat it completely differently than you would treat autocomplete. And that's really, really different. So anyway, I just want to sort of back up from that now and talk about, like, what the hell does this all mean for all of us? Because I'm sitting there thinking, well, okay, so what happens when I'm no longer the best programmer at ComicBase? It turns out that may be the second best programmer, and the best programmer is the autocomplete built into my development environment. Now, don't relax, guys. It's not quite that bad yet. That being said, this is a 1.0 release of the Visual Studio, so, hey, so it goes. Now, look, if we're serious about what AI means, and we have to realize, first of all, that we've been surrounded with it forever. So there's, if you're tempted to be completely freaked by it, as I certainly was, you got to tell yourself to calm the hell down, because we've been, again, my IDE has been auto-completing my variable names and passing me parameters and things like that for ages, and I don't think twice about it. I just think, well, it's just being helpful. You expect it to do that in any IDE which didn't do it, you'd get pissed at. I remember spending hours at one point because I'd installed an extension which somehow disabled the built-in autocompletion in Visual Studio, and I spent hours debugging my Visual Studio environment to restore the autocomplete again, because after a while you get so dependent on it. It's a major pain in your butt when it's not there anymore. It's like, well, I guess I could type out the other 8 characters I meant to type. What if I got one of the capitals wrong? And suddenly you're like, you don't even want to work anymore unless the thing's working, with you. But we've been having stuff like this in our life forever. If you guys write for a living on any level and you get out Microsoft Word, you will notice that not only does it tell you all your misspelled words, but it also will tell you things like, yeah, you used which when you meant to say that. Or it'll tell you when you, like, your case, when you used a singular over here, and but the verb you used against it was implied that it had a multiple people in the subject. It does this automatically. It just puts little squiggles under your lines. And we just think of it, I think of it like Grammarly, right? We just think of it like, oh, yeah, I was typing fast. And we don't even judge ourselves harshly for it. We don't think that that's us just not being up to snuff with, speaking English or spelling properly. We just think, no, I'm just working so fast. I didn't have time to properly spell the word properly, and so if I spelled it properly, that's just me typing so fast. And so we don't even beat ourselves up about that whole thing. We just the computer augmented version of ourselves, we think of it as the new reality. We just think that's how we naturally are. Turns out that's actually crap. No, we are actually sloppier than we've ever been when we type and communicate and things like that, because it's cheap to type, and it's really cheap when you've got someone watching over your shoulder for all the really embarrassing typos. Now, where it gets really fun is when you get something like autocorrect on your phone. Now, autocorrect, if you just get out your phone here and I just start typing a message on this thing, there are whole humor books that have been written on messenger exchanges that have gone horribly, horribly wrong, because someone's sitting there, especially if they're drunk dialing at 3 a.m, and they say, "Hey, have you got any pens?" And somehow it has decided that pens should have been another word, and then horrific exchanges, become legend in that part. But if you were to look for a book called, I think it's called "FU Autocorrect," there's a whole series of books like this, which is nothing but text exchanges, where autocorrect has made the commonplace just horrific because it put the wrong word in. The funny thing about autocorrect, though, is autocorrect isn't the same as the type correct spell check in your word processing program. It doesn't work anything like it, actually. Autocorrect is actually very sophisticated, but it's looking for different types of errors than you think it is most of the time. It's trying to figure out, first of all, not just what you misspelled, but what you misspelled based on the type of the sorts of errors people tend to make when they're thumb typing stuff. And so which is not the same errors you make as when you're doing this kind of typing. It does it partially by how frequently words are used. It does it often by how frequently they're used in a sentence, or what other words you've been using, and so forth. But it's not, again, it's still capable of doing some really dumb things. But honestly, if you ever turned it off on your phone, which is possible to do still, you'd find your phone just absolutely unbearable. Because if you think about what you've got to do to hit a target, and they taught us when we were doing interface design with early phones, that basically the hand, the human finger, is capable of hitting a target basically no smaller than about 1/4 of an inch by 1/4 of an inch. If you're expecting someone to click anything outside of that one, expect them to be making huge numbers of errors, which we do. And autocorrect makes it so that we don't even remember that we are making nearly as many errors as we are making all the time. Think about also, it's like, think about your camera. We all think that we are very, very competent photographers. No, we aren't. We're garbage photographers, but most of us, by and large. I mean, if you've had formal training on it and practiced a lot, you're probably okay. But if you used cameras back in the 70s, before auto exposure, before autofocus, before auto ISO, before anything like that, you have an idea of how really awful everyone really is at being a photographer, even when they've got a lot of film to burn and they can handle the mechanics of the processing and everything else. When they were doing the research on Instamatics, and later on, when they went to autofocus cameras and things like that, what they would do is they would look at hundreds of thousands of photos, and they try to figure out, what does everyone get wrong? And if you guys have a photo album in your family that dates back to the 70s, all the things you got wrong, or at least all the things that you got wrong, which was still the only picture of you guys at Disneyland. And so the one where Dad put his thumb over the camera and its whole thing's really kind of blurry and out of shape, it still is the only picture you've got of Aunt Margie with Mickey Mouse. And so that's the one you had to go with. The other ones just got thrown out at the photo mat because it was like, oh, look, it's another picture, of my dad who had horrific vision. He would always try to use the viewfinder, to correct for what his glasses were doing, and they'd shoot without his glasses because that was uncomfortable, which guaranteed that every single photo he ever took was out of focus. The best thing ever happened to our family's shared history is that one day an autofocus camera was invented, which, even though he'd do dumb stuff like that, it would still take an in-focus picture regardless. But even beyond that, your current camera is correcting so much stuff you have no idea of. Like, here's one that maybe you guys know about, maybe you don't. Let me throw it over on the screen here. So any of you guys who have a Samsung, and you've ever taken a picture of the moon, this is the top of this picture is a picture of the raw image sensor data that came off of a Samsung, I believe it's an S21, and the bottom is the full image of the moon that it showed you as the thing that you had just taken the picture of. Notice something special about those two images, and there's a lot of if you guys have a lot of interest in this sort of thing, you can go into the actual techniques of what it was doing here. They were calling this, I believe, space mode or moon mode or something like that. They when they introduced it at the time, but the idea was they were going to go, and they basically invented, because they know what the moon should have looked like. So in all those blotchy, blurry areas at the top there, they said, oh yeah, we know what should be there pretty much. And it invented the data, and they proved that it literally invented the data. It isn't like doing convolutions to do sharpening. It's none of that. That's not what's going on at all. They were able to prove that photographically, but using comparing the image sensor data and shooting, like, say, neutral gray squares, and seeing how if you took the neutral gray square and you put it near the moon, the neutral gray square would suddenly grow convoluted landscape data in it. And it did this absolutely algorithmically because the phone knew what the moon should have looked like. And so when you whipped your phone up to the moon and took a picture, it said, I can make this better for you. And it did. So yeah, that's been going on in our phones now for at least 4 generations. The S25 just came out. If you guys have ever been taking pictures of concerts or fireworks or things like that, that already immediately the latest versions of whoever's got the coolest phone at the concert is going to have a far better picture of the show than you will get with your 4-year-old one. Not only because it's got a better zoom and a better whatever else, but because it's very, very aggressively managing its what's called its ISO gain levels. It's doing automatic noise correction and minimization because it knows which part of the stage or which part of the sky is meant to be fireworks and which part isn't, or which part of the stage is meant to be where the lead singer is and which part is probably just black shadows and curtains. And so even though it's added a whole bunch of noise to the scene by putting its ISO gain levels up so high, it can actually just blip those out automatically before it even shows you the picture, so that what you think is that I just have a magic picture which just is really, really freaking good at taking pictures of shows, or really, really great at taking pictures of concerts. The Google Night Mode that you see on its latest things, if you take pictures of astronomy, or just landscapes at night, does the same kinds of things. It knows where the horizon line is, and it knows what sorts of things ought to be sky, and it just automatically noise changes and using AI touches out. It can push the image far too far but only in certain parts of the image, and automatically smooth out the effect in places where it knows the effect isn't throwing out any data you care about. So if you're taking a picture of a night sky, which will have nothing much in it, over a grassy field, it'll blur the hell out of the night sky that it threw all this noise into, and leave the grassy field alone so it doesn't look like a bunch of compression artifacts. Crazy stuff. But we just think this is just, we all just got to be great photographers all of a sudden, or our cameras are just really good. No, cameras, it's, when you look at a new model of the iPhone or things like that, it isn't so much that they improved the raw sensors. They've improved the processing of those sensors to make you into a freaking magician when you put these things up there. My wife, who spent a ton of years in Toastmasters, was similarly making a comment. Was I was kind of pre-shopping this discussion with her, and I said, "Yeah." She's like, "Yeah, I noticed that lately I go and I look at people's videos. Everyone just got really articulate all of a sudden, because you spend your entire life on Toastmasters trying not to say or have the awkward pauses that I'm sure if you played this back, you guys are getting every 3 seconds from me." But if I was to record this ahead of time, and we were to do this the way that any competent person who's doing podcasting on the internet would do it, there is a feature built into both Premiere and Camtasia and things like that just automatically removes all your ums. You just take the whole thing out there. It figures out where all your awkward pauses are, where you repeated the little part of the word, etc. It takes those things out, and it even smooths over the video with a little 1 or 2 frame blur, which makes it so it doesn't even give away the fact that your lips were doing the thing, and it just makes it all better. No human effort required. It does it automatically for you. Similarly, if I'm doing instructional videos, and I was doing this when I became very, very frustrated around the start of the last year, when I was starting to do take after take, and different production areas were getting me down. I could look at literally a text transcript of what I was saying, and when I wanted to get rid of a certain thing, I literally could just edit the word on the transcript, and it would sync all the video up around it and blur over the bits behind it so it hid the cut. I'm pretty sure that's how a lot of politicians' videos of the last administration in particular managed to make it onto TV. But anyway, that's an actual thing that's been going on for a while, but we just consider it as normal. Well, so what does this all mean for all of us? Now, for me, this weekend, like I say, the icy finger of not death, but at least the uncanny was rolling down my spine all weekend long, because I'll admit it, it can be an arrogant SOB sometimes, and you sit there and think, look, I think for a living. When I'm doing my job and I'm not just filing comic books or doing things like that, I get paid based on, can I think of something really cool that you guys will want to buy next year? Because if I can't, then what's going to go on? And then people stop buying things, and then I got to find something else to do with my life. But as long as I can think of something cool next year and make that happen, then hey, you've got a reason to throw some business my way next year, and that's how I make my money. So I was thinking, okay, I'm not doing like drone stuff most of the time, and so I'm thinking I'll be one of the last guys that gets affected by AI, but it's coming for us all. AI has already made it so that my first ambition when I was a kid, was I was like 12 years old or something like that, and you say, what do you want to be for a business? I thought, wow, I want to be a photographer, because at that point it was the most technical thing you could pretty much do in the world. It was kind of cool and kind of glamorous. Take pictures of neat stuff. You picture going to war zones and doing all the stuff. But again, that was right when autofocus was starting to come into the play. That was right when, this is well before digital, right? Photos were still expensive. Think about it today. How many people make a living, and I mean a living, like they get paid enough money to survive, as a photographer? We've never had more photography in our lives than we have had today. We have virtually every aspect of everything. We expect it. People talk about things like, Pixar didn't happen, and we think that that's a completely realistic way to live. At this point, it's becoming video where it didn't happen. So, but at the same time, though, between the time when I was a kid and now, certainly, almost no one gets paid to be a photographer. And despite the fact that the photographs that are coming out are better than ever, but there's very few of them that are so important that we want to actually spend money for them. If you guys saw, I guess it's just out of sight in my office there, but I've got a picture of, you might know the cover of London Calling. It's Paul Simon on destroying his bass after a very frustrating show. He's just cranking it over his head like that and wailing on stage. If you guys, if you saw the picture, you know it instantly. This is this kind of picture that just, I looked at it. If I wanted to buy a copy of the original from the person who took it, who's still alive, by the way, it's going to cost me £4,000, and it doesn't even come framed. She'll sign it, but it'll be a lovely picture, but it's £4,000 that I'll have to make do with the one I got off Etsy for $30. But very few photographers are getting paid big money for taking a picture. Once upon a time, was not only you had to have the right equipment, the right sensibility, you had enough technical nature to make it all work, and then you had to have at the right place at the right time and have the magic happen. Now we are taking pictures of every single minute that is happening on the world stage, and about the only picture I can think of that anyone could say, have you seen that picture, like the way we'd talk about Life magazine pictures, is probably that one where Butler, Pennsylvania, where Trump had just gotten shot, and he's gets up and he's doing his fight thing. That's probably about the only picture that I could put in front of her and everyone of the time could say, yeah, I've seen that picture, which again is a very, very well composed picture. If you look at the way that the triangles of composition and balance and everything else there. It's like it's absolutely beautiful. In this much the same way that if you look at the composition of the Paul Simon on Destroying His Base one that they use as the album as the cover of London Calling, it's compositionally absolutely beautiful. But it was also one of these magical things that happened right time, right place. And I guarantee, though, there were a dozen photographers shooting that day at Butler, Pennsylvania, shooting. But all of them, I guarantee, at the time were shooting with autofocus, auto exposure, their camera doing a million bits of processing before they even thought about getting this thing into Photoshop and prettying up the edge of something around it to give it, whatever little bit of extra gloss you might ever want to give something. We all are going to use the tools of our profession to the maximal thing. But the funny thing is, even the guys at the very top of their game, taking what are the most iconic pictures of the game, very few people today get paid to be a photographer. Absolutely vanishingly small. Even if you're working for a local paper, if you're the photographer and you're something else. You might be the guy who runs coffee and delivers the sheets to the printer and also is the cub reporter who covers the local city council events. You're not just the photographer anymore. Very few people can make as a photographer anymore. So there goes one of my dreams as a kid. But that sort of thing has come for any number of other professions. If your job, I always tell people when they start at human computing, they say, look, guys, we run a tight ship here. We're a small company. We got to move fast. And honestly, if you've got the kind of, if you're doing the kind of job that a robot can do, I don't need you because I would have a robot doing it. And so anyone who's working for us is doing something special that's not easy, for a regular person to do. That being said, over the years, I expect more and more out of those same people that I'm paying, similar amounts of money for. But just to give you an idea, is like, here's the picture of today's live stream, right? On Tuesday, I knew what I was going to be talking about, and I had them put up this picture. I gave this to my artist, and I said, "Look, hey, Mark, I need you to take the code samples I did from the Slack. I need you to put it next to a Terminator and call it Rise of the Machines." And he gave me that art sample back in 20 minutes. This is something that could not have been done. Let me just put up there again for a second. This is something that could not have been done 10 years ago. There's a certain amount of artistry involved with the whole thing, but between just the quick composition, the use of the fonts, the gradients that went down, everything that went up there, there's no AI per se at work in this whole thing. It isn't like he took it in Mid-Journey and cranked it out, which, by the way, if you've seen other things that he's done for thumbnails, AI, Mid-Journey definitely is part of what his tool set on the whole thing. But the whole thing is for him to be competitive as an artist in today's thing. That's the kind of turnaround time that you're actually expecting. This is also the same kind of composition where if I took that same composition, I showed it to someone 20 years ago, they'd be like, "Oh my God, it's amazing. How long did it take you to do that one?" And if you told them, "Yeah, a day and a half," they'd be like, "Oh yeah, that's pretty good work." No, this is 20 minutes now. And you actually expect people to be working at that level of professionalism if we're going to play in today's tools. So I guess it all comes down to this is, actually, let me tell you one last story, because I'll tell you how I ruined someone's life at an event at NAB. Let's see here. Okay, so announcements and questions and things like that. All right, we'll get to the announcements at the end here, but this is going to be a 200th anniversary celebration. Remains to be seen. We'll see. But anyway, I did want to say one other thing about tech, and then I want to talk about how I ruined someone's life, and then I'm going to wrap it up. Another thing about tech is, remember, we've been using whatever tools go along with us, and this applies to us whether we're there's an automatic gain function that's working on this microphone right at this very minute, that's making sure that I'm not peaking out and I'm not going too low. That's in addition to the compressor, which is another type of automatic gain control that's in the signal processing chain. This is something that's taking the place of what in 30 years ago would have been a guy twiddling a knob in a studio and being a competent sound engineer. Think about the last time you were in a club. When's the last time you were listening to a concert in a club where you heard the howl of feedback through the PA system? And my guess is, if you're anywhere normal, it's been 10 years. Used to be that was something that happened every single time you were started going with a band at some point. These days, they've built that feedback circuit, the feedback elimination circuit. It's a standard feature. It's been in even the sorts of thing that would be in really crappy clubs. That's been part of the sound, chain forever. And so there's no longer, you no longer hear the part where it starts going, and hopefully you woke up the stoned out sound engineer before he deafened every single person who was in the pavilion, because God knows that used to happen with, great regularity. It doesn't happen at all anymore. We're just used to it. But these skill jobs have become something that, like, as soon as you've got the tool in your arsenal, you don't give it up. You don't turn off autofocus for, if you're shooting, the president speaking when you think something might happen, because you can't afford to give it up. You can't give up that edge. Every single person who is taking pictures of the president today, or in Butler, Pennsylvania, or any other place, or, shooting the Super Bowl, every single one of those photographers has autofocus and auto exposure on, even though they're artistically enough that they could have turned it off and achieved a very lovely effect. But they got to have that level of productivity that the tools give them. Similarly, if, like, say I'm a luthier, right? There are luthiers in working in Nashville, where I'm at, who turn out just absolutely legendary guitars. They can charge $12,000 for a guitar, but not a one of them is using a handsaw to cut the body. They might be lovingly inscribing the rosewood and whatever else, but if there's a power tool that will make them more effective, they are using that tool, because you don't get any points for being behind the times. The thing I wanted to promise on the whole thing is I want to talk a little bit about guns, because that's always fun. You guys might be, if you guys ever played Call of Duty, you guys might remember a thing called the M1 Garand rifle. It looked like this. This was a huge improvement in the bolt action. I think it was the 1873 model that was in common use before, before this whole thing. I think it was a 1903 variant as well. But when World War II ran around, every one of the GIs, and if you've ever stormed the beach at Normandy yourself and playing Call of Duty, you were probably wielding something called an M1 Garand. And it used an 8. It is an 8-round. They call it a clip. And by the way, if you guys ever care, the difference between a clip and a magazine is exactly this. A clip was a metal band. That's the thing he's got his thumb on in the picture, which, basically bound together. It's like having a big paper clip around 8 different rounds of I believe it was 7.62 ammunition. You shoved it into the stock and you rammed the bolt home, and you were good to go. And you could fire 8 shots. On the 8th shot, you heard a horrific ping, and what that was the sound of the clip itself being shot into the air, and you're ready to slam the next clip in from your the bag of cartridges that you carried around you in a bunch of dump bags, right around your waist. That's what high tech military stuff was in World War II. Now, come Korea, the military switched to something new. This was the M14. Now, you'll notice this guy right over here, it doesn't have a clip. And what it has instead, looking at the bottom there, is what is a magazine. Right now, a magazine is a solid metal thing which contains all the bullets in it, and when it doesn't get ejected out the top or anything like that. No, it literally, you're going to take that whole metal piece that's protruding out of the bottom here. That thing is going to get ejected out there, and you're going to pop a new one in, and it'll have another 20 rounds in it. And and what happens to the old magazine, you don't care. Basically, what it is it's a spring-loaded thing to shove the rounds into the chamber as you expend each one. And so if you ever guys wonder what's the difference between a clip and a magazine, never say clip unless you're talking about something very, very old like an M1 Garand. Everything else these days has a magazine. Well, this is Korea, right? Now, think about what had just happened between those two wars, right? In World War I, you're firing one shot at a time, right? Out of a bolt action rifle. World War II, you're firing 8 shots at a time, right? Out of an M1 Garand clip. You are 8 times more powerful as an infantryman now than the guy with the bolt action, who, if you're in the heat of battle, you got a shot or two that you can get off in the heat of battle before the other guy gets a chance to have something to say about what you were doing. Whereas this one, basically, as fast as you can pull that trigger, you can be sending those things downrange. But you got 8 of them to get the job done. Here, by Korea, you had 20 rounds, to get the job done before you had to eject the mag. Well, then Vietnam came along, and I believe it was Eli Stoner who came up with the idea. This is the M16 rifle. It's based in it's, or you guys know it in civilian form as the AR, the AR-15, AR-16. AR is for Armalite rifle. But anyway, this is the genius thing there. You'll notice the clip on this one is bigger. It's protrudes a little bit more, bends even a little bit, and that one holds typically 30 rounds. But the other thing about it that's very different is the rounds in this case are pistol rounds. They're much shorter rounds. The rounds that were in a World War I, World War II, even a Korean one, were full on. They're 7.62 NATO cartridges. It's a big, heavy bullet. The idea is when I hit someone with this damn thing, they're going down and they're staying down. The idea by the time we got to Vietnam was, I want to be able to put a ferocious amount of fire downstream of this thing, and I hope to God something hits. But if I throw enough metal their way, if one round in them is going to be bad news for them, and if nothing else, it gives me a chance to put 2, 3, or however many more I got to put into them in order to finish the job. But the whole idea is you want to give one infantryman the same kind of power that a machine gun operator used to be able to do. But in order to make that happen, because you can't load up, I mean, these guys are already carrying 80, sometimes 100 pounds of gear with them, humping through through the bush. In order to make that happen, you had to make the rounds smaller. And so they changed out these rifle-sized rounds for pistol-sized rounds. And so if you look at a 5.56 cartridge and you look at a modern 9mm pistol round or things like that, it's basically the same size bullet. A little bit more propellant, sending it downrange in the 5.56 cartridge, but the actual bullet itself is not that big. It's not necessarily meant to be a one shot, one kill kind of deal. Now, when that happened, basically we stopped fighting wars the same way. Because it became possible for just Joe regular guy. Now, on the bad guy side, you also had the invention of the AK-47, AK-47, and the AK-74, and so forth. This is the Armory Kalashnikov, right? That's what the AK stands for. And what they were doing is they were finding another way to send a lot of bullets downstream in the whole thing. And there were different values incorporated in the different bodies of guns. The US and the NATO side still very much more like, yes, we would like to hit the thing we're aiming at, with great accuracy up to about 200 yards. So if I have a chance to take an aimed shot at that range, I would like a skilled marksman to be able to hit the damn thing. AK-47, no, they want to be able to stamp this thing out very, very cheaply, and they want to be able to drag it through all manner of jungle, mud, dirt, sand, whatever else. And the idea is that whatever happens, let's assume my guy's not particularly well trained, but my God, I've got a lot of them, and the gun will keep firing. And for the people who like AKs, that's largely the appeal, is whatever the hell you do to them, they will keep firing. Especially in the first round of the M16s, the GIs hated them. They really did, especially because, working through the jungle things, they hadn't done enough things to weatherproof them and so forth. So the first version of the M16 really, really not beloved by our own GIs. Then the M16A1, A2 came out and so forth, and it all got better. And now we have different carbons and so forth. We resolved those problems. But the idea is very much where the idea is that for both sides is you want one man. What used to be like, think about a musket man back in World War One, the Revolutionary War, going all the way up to the massed infantries of World War One. And sometimes even World War II. But the idea is that you would have concentrated fire because you had a lot of people firing one round at the same time, and then they would rack their bolt and put the next round in, and they'd fire again. And if you had 1,000 men doing that, it was a big wall of bad coming at you. But now we can do the same thing with a couple dozen men, and they would just be swapping cartridges a lot. And then, so that's a very powerful thing if you're a military guy. And it forced a very much a change of doctrine in the U.S. way of doing war and not everyone else's, where it took it from, especially the Marines, this was a tradition that died very hard. It took them down from the idea of like that every man's a marksman. It took them down to the idea that no, every man's a machine gunner. And so it was just the way that they've been trained went being less based on aimed fire and more towards how quickly can you throw a crap ton of lead down the range towards your foe. And so it changed the way we did war. Similarly, these AI tools, the machinification of everything, is making it so it's changing the way that we have our values of how we wage our own war. This is where I tell you about how I ruined the day of a doctorate. I guess, what do you call them? Well, I got a PhD of something or other when I was at NAB a couple of years ago. NAB is the National Association of Broadcasters. It's a show I go to every couple of years in order to oogle things that I can barely afford. Sometimes, like this microphone came from my last visit down there, because it was a very nice microphone that came up there, and it cost several $100. And I thought, well, okay, that'll be my big expense for having gone to the show this year, as you found a better vocal mic for the show. But anyway, somehow during the course of the whole thing, I wound up getting roped into a working session with a bunch of indie film directors and commercial directors and me. So who I have done some video and things like that, but I don't do video for a living per se. But we were roped into a working session, and the idea was we're going to have all these breakout groups, and this one PhD was coordinating them all, and it was an official artsy fartsy breakout group, because there were lots of colored pens and post-it notes and things like that around, which is all the set dressing when you're going to do something pretentious and obviously very creative and artsy, when you're doing these things. But the idea is that we were going to explore. I think Sora had just been demoed just right before the show, and it was setting the world on fire. It was really causing everyone who worked in commercial video to really question their life choices, because if I can sit there, I can either, like, let's say I want to take a picture of people walking down a rain-slicked, sidewalk in Japan, oogling the latest sports car, and I can either do this very expensively by, getting filming permits and hiring extras and costuming and, lighting crews and things like that, or if I could simply type a prompt into an AI generator and have the damn thing come out complete with camera angles looking beautiful. And I could do that whole thing. I don't care if it costs $1,000 a prompt. It would be 100-to-1 cost savings over the next cheapest way for me to accomplish that shot. So everyone at this place is just freaking out this year. And so they thought, okay, we're going to have this professor of media something or other, AI, blah, 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 come in and hold these workout sessions. I got roped into one of these ones. And the ostensible thought of the working group is, how do we employ the AI tools in a responsible way to make sure that no one's abusing them to do things that are going to basically cause mass unemployment in the film industry. They definitely were leading folks towards conclusions with the way they structured the whole workout session. But I was sitting there in the group with my guys, and I said, guys, can we just be serious for a second? How many of you guys wouldn't use this on your project? I mean, come on, for real. It's like, if you knew you could get that shot of the little covered wagon going under the, under the counter with the dog chasing and something, for puppy chow or whatever the thing is. If you knew that you could just literally say, animate a dog chasing a miniature covered wagon which vanishes under the cupboard, and you could get that whole thing done beautifully for $1,000 and be done and be showing the comps to the director by by noon. Who the hell wouldn't do that? And sheepishly, everyone kind of going like, well, yeah, I guess I would do that. So when it all came down to the end, we were supposed to present our working sessions of how we could use AI in a very responsible way. And people had all these ideas about government control and watermarking and stamping and detecting of AI and things like that. And our group was kind of like nah, dude, gloves are off. We're independent filmmakers and commercial directors and, scumbag technologists and stuff like that. And we're going to use every damn tool that we think can give us an edge. So good luck to the rest of you. But yeah, there's no stopping it. It's out in the world. No one's going to be able to stop this thing. I mean, there's definitely an urge to be very much, like Jacob Ludd with, and smash the mill machines. There's very much an urge to that, but it's never in the history of the world worked, and it's not going to start working now. If we've got a power tool that makes us far, far, far more effective in our field, if we don't use it to become more effective ourselves, our competition is using it against us, and that is going to suck. And I don't want to be the one out on the street, which means if I've got a way of doing what I do better, I'm using it. Now, this final thoughts on this whole thing, I believe everything I've just said. I believe it to the core of my being. I think if we look at the adoption of technology all across the world, I don't think there's ever been a time where technology, where humans have seen a better, faster way of achieving a higher quality result that would give them a one up on their competition and said, oh, yeah, that's not for me. I mean, individual people have done it. And sometimes those people are even so beloved and so skilled at doing things the old fashioned way that they can still make a living. But my God, is that not the rule of how to thrive as a society, or just in general in your thing? Like if I am, Christopher Nolan, I can get away with being the last guy who shoots on film. And because you'll put up with me because, my God, I brought in so many billions of dollars shooting on a thing that you think, you know what, I'll humor the guy, I'll overrun my project cost by 150 grand, to pay for film development because this guy doesn't want to shoot digital. And you'll put up with it because you think he's going to bring in so much more money through the sheer creative force of his will. And there are people who get along like that, but that is absolutely not the way to bet for any other thing. Again, even the hand luthiers of Nashville, they're using power tools to cut out and shape the form. They might hand engrave and hand, do, filing and finish work and things like that. But if there's something that will give them a superior result faster, absolutely they're going to use it. And this is what we all have to do in our lives if we want to play. Because I think if we look at what happens overall, and I did want to show one last set of graphs. This is, when people are being snarky and awful, and they talk about things like, well, your profession has become obsolete. They were saying this, some scumbag journalist was saying this to people who got laid off when they canceled the XL Keystone pipeline. They said, well, you guys should just learn to code. And so, of course, when the journalists got laid off by ChatGPT, a lot of other people took great delight in telling the journalists that they should learn to code. But anyway, this is the list of jobs. This is according to the St. Louis Federal Reserve employment data. This is the list of jobs in the last 5 years. Unfortunately, the graph only goes back 5 years. I can't extend the graph further back than that, so I can't tell you how this plays as a historical trend, but take it for what it's worth. This is just their index. This is basically every job listed on Indeed. So you see that we had a real big run up as we're getting out of recession and COVID and crap like that, and it's been trailing off a bit. It's not cratering or things like that, but it's it's a little soft right now. So if you've got a job you like in this current economy, I'd say by and large hang on to it. It's not. These are certainly not boom times. In 2020, if you had a pulse, you could get a job. And now, not so much. But again, it's not the end of the world. Let's take that. That's the general graph, because I want to say that one just to play fair. This is the graph for coders. A little steeper. So in 2020, we took this massive, massive run up till about the middle of 2022. And then it freaking hit the floor again. So yeah, these are software development job postings in the US. Anyone's guess where this goes from there? What I want to say about this is basically it goes back to the power tools. We've got the ability now as programmers, or in your profession, whatever your profession is, there are power tools that are coming in. And I do think the world is changing faster than we ever thought it would change. Again, when the steam engine came in and started automating the looms, Jacob Ludd was leading his workers in a series of strikes to smash the looms because you're ruining our way of life. And I understand that. I really do. This is super disruptive stuff. It has a lot of negative externalities. Hell, it has a lot of negative first-order effects. But the fact is, a guy with a hand loom could no longer be competitive as soon as there was a mill in town that could do fabric at 100 times the rate as a hand looming guy. It doesn't matter how good the guy with the hand loom was anymore. Those things were coming and they were here to stay. The funny thing is, after a while, it became a guy who also was willing to work cheaper someplace else. The work went over for him. No one makes garments in America or for that matter, England these days anymore. The actual fabric itself is made in places like, Burma, some places where the human wages for just even the people to feed stuff into the looms is very, very cheap, because an average semi-trained worker is so productive using the power tools and the whole thing that unless you've got some special sauce that you can bring to the table that makes you worth a lot more than what they are, you can't command anything like a living wage, certainly not by Western standards and the whole thing. And that's a real deal for people especially in the West. We're used to, hey, we do thought work. We're used to having a living wage for what we do. It's a really big concern, the idea that power tools are coming along here. And if I adopt them, I can maybe keep my job, right? Because I will become a much more effective person. If I don't adopt them, and which means I got to learn a bunch of new stuff. I got to get up to them. I got to be as good as the average person who's using the new power tool. But if I somehow feel like, I'm old, man, I can't grab all this new technology stuff. The second you do that, then suddenly you're the guy with the hand loom competing against the steam loom guy. And you're not going to be at your place very long, would be the general way of looking at that one. And that's going to apply to even people like me when you're coding. I have code analysis tools that are running in the background. I have autocompleters, and now I have an AI looking over my shoulder. And I am at the point now where I'm either going to adopt these things and learn every trick I can from them, and frankly become one of the best people who knows how to use this thing to become an even better coder. But I got to be on the top of that curve, because the option of not joining at all or just doing the bare minimum makes it so that what I'm doing isn't as competitive as Joe Schmo, who just got out of programming school, who suddenly has got an AI to make him perform like someone with 5 years of experience. Suddenly my relative value in the marketplace will have gone way down. Now, if I get really, really good, and this makes me even better, I might be able to become, an even more valuable guy at the top of my profession, because now I might not just be a superstar coder, but now I'm a superstar coder with super tools. You see guys like this on the internet who are like photographers who also are, photo, manipulation geniuses. Those guys are worth money. Same thing goes for any other field where there's a big amount of technological change. If you can master the tools and your craft and the business and the sensibility and the artistic composition and the marketing, if you can make it all go together, you can make a hell of a lot of money. But the amount of productivity you're expected to bring to the table to even be competitive is on this big, big ratchet up. And the learning curve required to get there is not insignificant. So if you feel like you're not up for the challenge, get prepared to be not worth as much money to your employer, because the next guy who comes in there armed with a power tool, if he can perform the way that you could with the height of your skills without the power tool, then suddenly you're worth about as much as the new guy. You're not worth as much as you were. So that's, I think, the thing that we're going to have to take with us on this one, is it's a brave new world out there. It's changing very fast. It's going to be disruptive as hell. And frankly, I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be wanting to smash the looms or just say, screw it, I just can't do it anymore. And not do what they were doing professionally anymore. I mean, I no longer want to become a professional photographer. I take better pictures now than I ever took when I was trying really, really hard with my, Nikon FM fully manual, 35 millimeter camera. My pictures today run circles around what I was taking before, but I can't get paid for any of them. And that's going to be a lot of people. I think a lot of people will find it very hard to get paid to be average in their jobs, because I think the machine baseline, the power tool assisted baseline for very many jobs is going to be higher than what they're bringing in. And so they're not worth employing at all. I also think there's a big classes of jobs that just may go away. If your entire class of your job relies on having specialized knowledge, for instance, like if I need to know, what's an average price of grain trading going into Bangalore, for whatever else on a given day, that doesn't become the job of a commodity specialist anymore. That becomes the job of a tech analysis platform or ChatGPT. Your years of experience in knowing the patterns of these things aren't necessarily worth anything anymore if a computer can just do the job. So yeah, be prepared for a lot of fields for the jobs to just go away. Now, are there going to be new jobs doing things like essentially, preparing the computers? Are there new jobs for things like becoming an expert in writing, mid-journey scripts, or teaching people how to write better AI prompts and things like that? Absolutely. But be prepared for those to age out very rapidly as the technology scene goes. This is a stressful time to be a human. I have a lot of sympathy for this, and I'm a technical. I mean, I'm the boffin type of guy. I mean, I like the tech for the tech's sake, because I'm not that different from a lot of guys this way. I think women might actually have it harder to the extent that you're actually smart enough to be, based on people as opposed to things, because the things are really changing up the game a lot here. I can definitely say, if I were going to start it all over again, I'm saying, what is the growth opportunity for the 21st, end of the 21st century? I was telling people, kind of like halfway joking, halfway not joking, you might want to just open a brew pub, because I think there's going to be a lot of openings for someone who wants to hang out around other people and have companionable discussions over a lot of beer, probably consumed during the day. Talk about why it is that your life lacks any kind of purpose or mission anymore. Because I think that's probably going to be the challenge of the 21st century, is finding people who used to have, purpose in their work, who suddenly are not feeling like they're able to keep up with the pressure of the power tools being brought to bear in that work to still remain relevant. And I think it's going to be really interesting to watch how our society addresses that issue. All right, guys. Well, that is it. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your thoughts and your attention on the whole thing. A couple quick announcements, please. Don't forget, if this is the sort of thing you like, to hit the like and subscribe button, and please leave comments in the live stream. It does help a lot. We do also have message boards on the forum at forums.comicbase.com, and we also have a dedicated thread on the ComicBase message boards where you can suggest new live stream inputs and demos, and you can also find Andre's world famous ComicBase cover catalog there. So have a look at it, and good luck, God bless, and we'll see what we do on the 200th one, guys. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.